The ambition of colonizing the moon has become NASA's goal ever since they left the planet in the 60s. However, the U.S. commercial space company has since been facing several challenges, or call it frustration, to get back on the moon again and create a permanent base there. At that time, the United States was still lagging behind the Soviet Union in space development. Therefore, Kennedy's brave idea was embraced by America's Cold War era. After 5 years of work by an international team of scientists and engineers, it was completed in 1966. Then, NASA carried out the first unmanned Apollo mission, which tested the structural integrity of the proposed launch vehicle and spacecraft combination. Then, on January 27, 1967, a fire broke out during a manned launch pad test of the Apollo spacecraft and Saturn rocket at Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral, Florida. The fire killed 3 astronauts. But, despite the catastrophe, NASA did not stop there because mankind needed to reach and study other planets in our universe. Let's find out the challenges that NASA is facing in its quest to land back on the moon again. But, unfortunately, as much as NASA has tried so hard to take their astronauts back to the moon, they don't seem to get things right. The Day of Wonder, July 20th, 1969, was a breakthrough moment in human history when American astronauts Neil Armstrong and Edwin "Buzz" Aldrin became the first humans to set foot on the moon. Armstrong became the first person to walk on the moon around 6.5 hours after the landing. As he took his first step, Armstrong famously said, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." It was an incredible experience for him because he was the first man to set foot on another planet in the universe. 8 years after President John F. Kennedy declared a national ambition of landing a man on the moon, the Apollo 11 mission took place. Apollo 17, which occurred on December 7th and 19th, 1972, was the last crewed mission to the moon. It was a 12-day mission that set numerous records, including the longest spacewalk, the longest lunar landing, and massive number of lunar samples returned to Earth. NASA's efforts to send astronauts to the moon had ever since been fruitless, from one rocket failure to another. The company has become desperate to the extent they believed in SpaceX, so they have to award SpaceX the lunar lander contract. But the most discouraging scenario is that SpaceX founder Elon Musk has found solace in his new toy, Twitter. He had vented most of the time catching fun on the social media platform and perhaps forgot that he had collected $2.9 billion lunar contract from NASA to send their astronauts back to the moon again. But since other businesses and Twitter somehow is distracting Elon's attention right now, NASA has become bothered and wonders if the moon mission could be possible through SpaceX. Furthermore, right now that the Biden administration is still running, the President of the United States doesn't seem to buy the idea of landing NASA's astronauts on the moon again. If former President Kennedy was on seat today, NASA might have made more than 5 trips to space and back. But NASA now has to face the US president, who seems interested in something else other than space venture. Maybe Biden's attention is still on Europe and the US gas pipeline supply, which Russia has cut off. Nord Stream 1, Russia's largest gas pipeline to Europe, has been halted indefinitely following the discovery of a number of leaks in it. EU leaders claim the leaks were created on purpose. On the other hand, Russia says that the West's severe economic sanctions are to blame for the indefinite suspension of gas supply via Europe's main pipeline. So, let's say different countries are fighting for their selfish interest, and the crisis between world powers which diverts government funding is another crucial reason why NASA has yet to land on the moon. Another source of concern is the environmental impact of lunar space exploration. The first consideration is the eons of meteorite impact. Moon dust, also known as regolith, is electrostatically charged due to its contact with the solar wind. This lunar dust will also impact the Apollo missions, and the astronauts will find it difficult to stay in space for an extended period. A life-threatening issue such as this must be handled for any permanent dwellings to be established on the moon. Similarly, the lunar space is exposed to a boiling hellscape for around 14 days, causing it to generate severe radiation capable of destroying human organs. Because the moon lacks a protective atmosphere, its surface becomes completely black within 14 days, making it a freezing environment for humans. To deal with the dark times on the moon, NASA is working on a power system to provide electricity to astronauts and equipment. It has also developed sun and dust-resistant spacesuits and rovers to help missions to lunar surface last longer. However, whether the technology is ready for launch has yet to be determined, and all of this raises the question of whether human lives are at risk on the lunar surface. This single question also gave birth to the idea of sending robots robots there? But the heartbreaking answer can be found in NASA's astronaut Buzz Aldrin's comment, where he said that while robots produce amazing science, human input is mandatory and cannot be replaced. He recalled a day when he and Neil Armstrong were on Apollo 11 and smelled the fragrance of lunar sand. Neil Armstrong described the odor to smell like wet ashes, whereas Buzz Aldrin said that it smells like burned charcoal after a fireworks show. In either case, no robot can be able to perceive or reveal the smell of the lunar soil. There is also a belief that massive and dangerous aliens lurk around the moon, and there is a time some astronauts return to Earth with alien specimens, which are now kept in top-secret laboratories. But if there are aliens, humans are not the only civilized beings in the universe, and we don't want to mess with those guys. We don't want to live through real-life Star Wars or interact with any alien traits that will melt our hope of traveling to the moon. Many people believe that humans can only travel to the moon on paper or through software modeling, and no specific studies have been conducted to verify that we humans can live on the moon for up to a week, let alone Elon Musk's Mars aspirations, which is why he is working on the Starship. There are reasonable points that may have given the US government cold feet to take the risk and invest a chunk of taxpayers' money in the lunar landing project, just as President Kennedy did in his time. Some argue that the real issue is not returning to the moon, but how this moon mission can benefit mankind in the next decade. So, the question over the years has been whether traveling to the moon is even worthwhile in the first place, and we need authentic proof that there are scientific benefits to this mission. Some astronauts believe that the moon is a great resource for learning about the evolution of the solar system. However, the moon is not friendly to humans. It has a harsh weather condition with no atmosphere or moving water. Because it is not prone to erosion, neither does it have a clear climate condition. According to David Kring, a lunar geologist, there was an occurrence in 2003 when the Space Shuttle Columbia crashed above the Earth's atmosphere. This resulted in the deaths of all 7 crew members. And again, the topic of why individuals risk their lives venturing into space was addressed. This is why, according to President George W. Bush, if space exploration puts people's lives in danger, landing on the moon might not be the best venture. And again, is the risk worth it? This is unquestionably one of the issues preventing NASA from visiting the moon again. And it's also the main reason why Apollo 11's successful trips to and from the moon were a complete disgrace. Unfortunately, despite the overwhelming evidence supporting the success of the Apollo 11's journey, some people continue to think that the operation was to cash out more dollar bills at the forefront. In a pamphlet titled "We Never Went to the Moon," released in 1976, Casing makes the case that the US needs more technological capacity to undertake a successful mission to the moon and return. Since he argued from an insider's perspective and had actually participated in the design of the Saturn V rocket engines, his opinions were incredibly convincing. According to this school of thought, we could not have been to the moon or plan to do so since we cannot build a spacecraft capable of making the journey. The question today is, how can NASA fulfill the wish to send a new group of astronauts to the moon? While they figure out how to achieve this, SpaceX has officially revealed a new huge update on Crew Starship interior system. It looks that someone is having an advantage. Just click on the video to know more about this.